This is a production of Cornell University.
Hello, my name is Kensy Rodriguez. I am a Ph.D. student at Cornell, and I am with...
I'm Chris Smart. I'm a vegetable pathologist at Cornell.
And today we will talk about one of the most common problems that we can see in a cucurbit field, and it's powdery mildew. So we have Chris here. So Chris, can you tell us a little bit about this problem and what is it and how we can recognize it?
Absolutely. So as Kensy said, powdery mildew is one of the most common diseases that we see on cucurbits, and that's whether it's in a farmer's field, on a pumpkin field, or a zucchini squash field, or in your own backyard. Let's start to talk a little bit about powdery mildews in general. They get their name because they give the leaf a very powdery look, and people will recognize this because you see it on almost every type of plant there is. Importantly, the fungus that attacks cucurbits is different, similar, yet different from the one that you might see on your lilac or your peony or any of the other plants that you're growing. There's a powdery mildew that attacks almost every plant that there is.
Anything that we can do in order to control or manage it?
Yeah, so let's talk about what we're seeing first. And if you look at this leaf here, you see this white powdery appearance, and it almost looks like someone has shaken powdered sugar onto the leaf itself. What you're actually seeing are the spores of the fungus. So this fungus has a very unique life cycle. You can't grow it in culture in the lab, which is pretty unusual for plant pathogens. It has to grow on plant tissue like a leaf surface. So the fungal spores, like these here, one spore will land on the leaf and it'll actually germinate and penetrate into the cell of the leaf. And that's how it lives. It actually essentially sucks the juice from the plant. Mm-hmm. So knowing that, what you see on the leaf here are the spores, but the actual body of the fungus itself is inside the leaf. You know, you asked about, what do we do? How do we recognize it? There are diagnostic tools, but really powdery mildew is one of the easiest diseases to identify. In terms of control strategies, powdery mildew is somewhat different from some other plants because it actually prefers the healthiest leaves on the plant. So some diseases do best when the plants, the bottom leaves start to senesce or there's a wound. Powdery mildew really likes that healthy leaf, and the reason is because it needs those healthy cells to get its energy.
Great.
So if you give the plant too much nitrogen and you have so many leaves, I mean this cucurbit plant has a lot of leaves here, that actually benefits powdery mildew.
Are we gonna see these mostly in like younger or older leaves, or it will be distributed even? And are the leaves the only ones that get the powdery, or can we see it in the stems of the plant? How is it distributed?
So in cucurbits, you'll see it on the leaves, the petioles of the leaf. Like, I'm just going to pull this one right off. You can see there's powdery mildew on the petiole of the leaf right there. And you can also see it on the stems in particular, you see it on pumpkin fruit. And it's a huge problem in pumpkin. If there's powdery mildew on the stem, that handle of the fruit gets weaker. Mm-hmm. So when people go, you're at a U-Pick pumpkin farm and it's awesome, and you go to pick up your pumpkin and the handle breaks off. And no one wants that. And usually that's due to powdery mildew.
Are we going to see any rotting over the fruit whenever the disease is present? No,
the only way you would see rotting, the powdery isn't really going to attack the fruit. The way you'd see rotting is if the powdery was so severe that you lost the leaves, and then the fruit could get sun scald. And then once it gets scalded by the sun, then you can get secondary rots that might come in.
Will pruning the diseased leaves will help for the disease?
So if you prune early enough, anytime you get inoculum out of the field, you're gonna reduce the chance of spreading. But with powdery mildew, there are so many spores that it's really, really hard to control by taking out the leaves. This plant itself, probably has 1 million spores on it, and this leaf isn't even that coated.
Yeah.
So it's really hard, and you can see it, the powdery mildew just starting right there, and you know that the fungus is already inside the leaf. So taking off the powdery mildew infected leaves, it isn't going to be the best strategy for controlling this particular disease. If there was one leaf that was completely coated in powdery mildew and the rest of the plant had a lot less, I would probably take that off and get it out of there. Yeah. But especially in a large field situation, that's a tough thing to do.
So is there anything that we can do? For example, are there varieties that are less susceptible to powdery mildew?
Yes, there are, and there are cultivars that have a powdery mildew resistance gene, and our lab actually is working with a breeder at Cornell, Michael Mazurek, and his lab has different cultivars that are resistant, and he's actually trying to breed that resistance into winter squash. There's already some resistance in melon and some of the other cucurbits.
Great. Is there any other thing that you will like to tell us about the disease? Or
Yeah, so powdery mildew is also somewhat unique in that it does best when there's high humidity but not free water on the leaves. So when there's water on the leaves, the conidia of powdery mildew are actually quite fragile. They don't do well in water, but if there's high humidity, they just thrive. So finding ways to keep the humidity down is very helpful. So in a really rainy year, you tend to see less powdery mildew. However, if you're in a garden scenario and it's a dry year, going out and hosing down your plants once a day is actually just going to increase the humidity, so that would probably increase the powdery mildew. Other things that a grower will do is there are control strategies, lots of different control strategies for powdery mildew. Because the fungus produces so many spores, one of the things that is fairly common, especially in all powdery mildews, but in cucurbit powdery mildew for sure, is fungicide resistance. So growers are really careful about rotating fungicide chemistries and making sure that they're only using products that are going to be effective against the powdery mildew that's in their field. In the home gardener situation, you might hear a lot of folks talk about baking soda or other things to apply to plants. And there are commercially available products that are very similar to baking soda, and those can be effective against powdery mildew, especially on a small scale.
Listen, if I am a farmer, let's say I have a lot of cucurbits on my field, does the spacing will affect the absence or presence of the disease?
Yeah, so anything you can do to reduce the humidity, inside a very lush plant will help. But because the conidia can fly a really long way, its spacing isn't going to help as much as it would with other diseases. So these conidia certainly can fly throughout this field and to other cucurbit fields in the area, and then once they have the powdery mildew, they blow in the wind, and they can blow in the wind from there.
So it's mainly transmitted by the wind. Is there any insect that we can see that can transmit the disease, or only wind?
Wind is the major way that the pathogen gets around. There are it can overwinter in your soil, and I don't see any here today, but sometimes if you have a very thick patch of powdery mildew like this, you'll see black dots inside of it, and those are called chasmathecia. And those chasmathecia are actually the overwintering structure of the powdery mildew, and those will fall into the soil. If this leaf debris is left in the field, it'll get tilled in, and they will release spores in the spring, and that's frequently how this might get started.
So you recommend at least getting rid of like old plant debris in the field?
Yeah, if at all possible, getting rid of plant debris in the field and just getting anything that's diseased out of your field will be a big help.
Okay, thanks, Chris. So we just learned about powdery mildew. If you need more information or want to learn more about vegetables, go to the Cornell vegetable website and you will find a lot of information there. Thank you.
Thank you.
This has been a production of Cornell University, on the web at cornell.edu.